It's one thing to discover someone is tampering with your property, but it hits completely differently when that person happens to be the president of your HOA. This woman was secretly renting out my lakeside home for $250 a night without ever asking me. She had turned my house into her personal money machine, acting as though she had every right to do it. But the day I showed up, she got the shock of her life. Trust me, she never saw it coming. Have you ever had anyone cross the line with your belongings like that? After spending 15 years tattooing in cramped New York studios, breathing secondhand smoke and dealing with landlords who treated artists like leeches, I finally saved enough to escape. The lake house wasn't extravagant, but it was exactly what I needed. A proper workspace for my tools, a view that wasn't blocked by dumpsters or fire escapes, and above all, peace. For the first time in years, I could actually think clearly. I probably should have known that calm wouldn't last, but those first few days felt like I'd hit the jackpot. Boxes were still stacked in my living room when I realized I'd stumbled into something I didn't even know I'd been searching for. The moving truck had barely disappeared down the gravel road when she appeared. I was on my new deck, coffee in hand, watching the morning sun glimmer on the water when she arrived at my front door wearing a smile that immediately set my nerves on edge. You know the type, that overly bright smile that screams, "I'm about to make your life miserable, but I'll do it politely." Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, a clipboard clutched to her chest like a weapon, and she wore the uniform of HOA Authority khakis, a crisp white polo, and spotless shoes that had never touched real dirt. Something about her presence made me instantly uneasy. "Hi there, I'm Denise, president of the HOA. Welcome to our little paradise," she said, extending her hand with the energy of someone selling vacation timeshares. I shook it, because what else was I supposed to do? At first, I figured it was just neighborly courtesy. Maybe she'd brought cookies or a list of restaurant recommendations. Looking back, the way her eyes kept darting past me into my house like she was taking inventory should have been a warning, but still caught up in the excitement of my new place, I invited her in for coffee. Biggest mistake I ever made. At first, the conversation seemed harmless. She asked about where I'd moved from, how I liked the area, basic small talk. Then she complimented the house, calling it a great investment property. That phrasing struck me as odd, but I brushed it off. When she asked what I did for a living, I told her I was a tattoo artist setting up a home studio. That's when her entire expression shifted. Her smile remained, but it morphed from genuine warmth to something stiff and forced. Her eyes turned icy, scanning me as though I'd just confessed to something criminal. "Oh," she said, dragging out the word like it tasted sour, "tattoo artist. Well, I hope you understand we have certain standards here." The way she emphasized standards made it obvious she wasn't referring to lawn care. My grip tightened around my coffee mug, bracing for the judgment I'd heard countless times before. People who saw tattoos as rebellion instead of art, people who assumed I was some kind of delinquent. "What do you mean by standards?" I asked, keeping my tone steady. "Are you talking about me or my work? Because I can assure you both are entirely respectable." She gave a hollow laugh. "Oh, I'm sure you're very talented, Leo, but this neighborhood has a certain character, and we work very hard to preserve it." She flipped through her clipboard like she was reading from scripture. "We have rules about noise levels, property upkeep, and of course, business activity. I do hope you checked with the HOA before setting up a commercial operation." The implication was crystal clear. No, I hadn't, and yes, that was going to be a problem. My sense of peace vanished as quickly as mist off the lake. Then she really launched into Ida, listing rules one after another. Grass must be cut weekly, no exceptions. Noise restrictions strictly enforced after 8 p.m., covering even equipment use. Home business activity forbidden during designated quiet hours, which conveniently stretched from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. She rattled them off like she was reading me my Miranda rights. With each rule, it sank in deeper. I hadn't just bought a house. I'd stepped straight into a battle with a woman who saw me as a threat to her carefully polished kingdom. Did she really think I was planning to turn the place into a biker bar? The whole exchange felt surreal. 2 days later, I got my first taste of just how far she'd go. A note taped to my door, written in Denise's neat handwriting. "Vehicle parked improperly, $200 fine." I stared at it, baffled. My truck was parked in my own driveway at the same spot since the day I moved in. I went outside, circled it, checking every angle. It wasn't blocking anything, leaking fluids, or even particularly dirty. But apparently, buried somewhere in the HOA's rulebook, there was a clause that made this a violation. Only someone actively hunting for problems would enforce something that absurd. As she finally left that first day, Denise paused at my door, plastering on that same fake smile. "I'll be keeping an eye on you, Leo," she said. The way she emphasized it sent a chill crawling down my spine. "We all will." It wasn't a neighborly welcome, Mia, it was a warning, maybe even a threat. I watched her march away, clipboard tucked tightly under her arm like a weapon, and my stomach sank. The silence I had paid so much to enjoy no longer felt like peace. It felt like the stillness right before a storm breaks. The lake that had shimmered beautifully that morning now looked dark, like it was hiding secrets I wasn't prepared to face. As she fumbled with her car keys at the end of my driveway, I noticed something unusual. Her hands were trembling. For a moment, I couldn't tell if I'd just walked into a battle by accident or if she had been waiting for me all along. When I received that first parking violation, my instinct was to laugh it off. Surely, this had to be some kind of misunderstanding, or maybe even hazing for the new guy in the neighborhood. But when I called the number on the notice, Denise herself answered in that syrupy sweet voice. Patiently, she explained that not knowing the HOA rules was no excuse for breaking them. To prove her point, she offered to send me the full handbook, 47 pages long, 47 pages for a neighborhood with barely 20 houses. I asked if she might give me a warning this time, seeing as I was new and had no idea about this obscure parking regulation. Her refusal was swift, cold, and oddly gleeful. Denise didn't do warnings. The following week brought another hit. After a simple grocery run, I opened my mailbox to find a fresh handwritten violation. Grass high, $175 fine. I stared at my lawn. It looked fine, but curiosity got the better of me, so I grabbed a ruler. The blades of grass measured 3.5 inches. According to her note, the maximum height was 3.5 inches. She wanted to fine me nearly $200 over half an inch of grass. Standing in my own yard with a ruler in hand, I honestly felt like I was losing my grip on reality. And just when I thought it couldn't get more ridiculous, Tuesday rolled around. I was in my studio, sketching a design for a client, when I heard footsteps on my deck. Through the window, I saw Denise circling my house like a suburban detective, holding what looked like a decibel meter. 20 minutes later, there was another note taped to my door: noise disturbance, $300 fine. According to the violation, I had been operating loud machinery during quiet hours and disrupting the peace of neighboring homes. Loud machinery? It was a tattoo machine. The thing doesn't make more noise than an electric toothbrush. Yet Denise was acting as if I was running a demolition crew inside. I actually sat down with that notice in my hands, trying to process the absurdity of what I was reading. That's when I noticed Frank. He lived across the lake, an older man who spent most of his time sitting on his porch, quietly observing the neighborhood as if it were his personal TV show. At first, I assumed he was just another nosy neighbor, maybe even one of Denise's allies keeping tabs on me. But there was something different about him. While Denise prowled around my property with her measuring tools and endless rules, Frank would just shake his head, not in disapproval of me, but in a way that suggested he'd seen this spectacle before. His sharp eyes seemed to catch everything, and I got the sense he knew far more than he let on. The harassment didn't slow, it accelerated. Denise had a never-ending imagination for violations. My garden gnome was unauthorized DA copyright core. The wind chimes on my porch exceeded permitted noise levels for decorative items. Even my doormat apparently broke the rules because it wasn't the regulation size. Each notice came with a fine, and each fine was higher than the last. I started wondering if she was working off a quota, like she got paid per violation she issued. The whole ordeal was so absurd I could hardly believe it was real. But the bills piling up in my mailbox were very real. Things finally boiled over when the HOA called an emergency meeting to discuss new community standards. I went, partly because I figured it was about time I met more of my neighbors, and partly because I needed to understand what kind of game Denise was playing. The community center turned out to be someone's garage outfitted with folding chairs and a card table. Around 15 people showed up, most of them looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. At the front, Denise stood proudly, presentation board propped up, clipboard in hand, ready to deliver her speech. She called it concerning changes in neighborhood dynamics. I should have known immediately it was about me, but I still clung to the hope that maybe, just maybe, this was about something that actually mattered to the community. Denise didn't say my name outright, but she didn't have to. Her carefully chosen words, combined with pointed glances in my direction, said enough. We must take into account residents who don't fully understand our community values, she declared, her tone tightening. Then her voice dropped lower, calculated and cold. This neighborhood runs on our rules. You'll either abide by them or you'll leave. And with that, she proposed a brand new rule, a ban on all business activities between the hours of 6 a.m. and 10 p.m. The new rule Denise pushed would have shut down my studio during the only hours I could realistically work. As she announced it, I felt every set of eyes in that room turn toward me. It was like I was standing trial in front of the entire neighborhood, guilty of nothing more than existing in Denise's carefully crafted world. This wasn't about property values or community harmony. This was personal. She was using the whole like a weapon to drive me out. What stung the most wasn't even her, it was my neighbors. People I'd hoped to befriend, maybe share beers and laughs with on weekends, were sitting quietly, nodding along as she painted me as the problem. I wanted to speak up, to defend myself, to say I wasn't some menace, that my tattoo machine was quieter than most of their TVs, but in my head, it all sounded weak, like excuses. Out loud, it would have been worse. So I stayed silent, watching Denise's plastic grin stretch wider as she slowly poisoned the room against me. After the meeting, I was heading to my truck when Frank appeared at my side. For an older man, he moved quietly, so much so that I nearly jumped. His voice was gravelly, worn down by years of cigarettes and whiskey. Son, he said, that woman ain't what she seems. Used to sell houses back in Arizona. Damn good at it, from what I heard. Before I could ask what he meant, Frank melted back into the shadows like some kind of ghost of the neighborhood. His warning lingered in my mind all the way home. But when I pulled into my driveway, something else froze me in place. Fresh tire tracks in the gravel. They weren't mine. That night, Frank's cryptic words echoed in my head. Denise wasn't just a power-hungry HOA president. There was something else, something bigger, and I needed to find out what. So I decided to fight fire with fire, or in this case, surveillance with surveillance. I ordered a set of security cameras disguised as solar lights and spent a weekend installing them around the property. If Denise wanted to keep creeping around, I was going to capture every second of it. Those cameras were the smartest investment I ever made. By day, they looked like harmless landscaping lights. By night, they captured high-definition footage, everything backed up to the cloud. I positioned them carefully, covering my driveway, my front door, and the path down to the lake. If Denise wanted to play games, I was ready. The first week's recordings were exactly what I expected. Denise wandering by at odd hours, peeking at my trash bins, scribbling in her notes. Standard HOA busybody behavior, nothing shocking. But the second week broken bar, that's when things got strange. Reviewing the footage one evening, I watched Denise approach my front door with something in her hand. At first, I assumed it was another violation slip, but when I zoomed in, my stomach dropped. She was holding keys. My keys. She glanced around to make sure no one was watching, then slipped them into the lock and walked straight inside, like she owned the place. I replayed the clip 3 times, unable to believe my eyes. Somehow, she'd gotten copies of my house keys, and she was letting herself in whenever I wasn't home. The footage only got worse. About 20 minutes after Denise entered, a well-dressed middle-aged couple showed up, carrying a camera. Denise welcomed them inside. I sat frozen, watching as these strangers wandered through my house. They weren't workers or inspectors. They weren't there on any official business. They were examining the place, opening doors, pointing at fixtures, taking pictures, jotting notes. The woman even checked inside my fridge, like she was already imagining herself living there. It hit me then. They weren't guests. They were buyers. I watched on my phone from the grocery store parking lot, hands shaking, As the man snapped photos of the living room from every angle while the woman measured windows and noted layouts, they lingered on the deck, gesturing out toward the water, deep in discussion I couldn't hear. When they finally left, Denise walked them to their car and handed over some paperwork. The entire thing looked exactly like a real estate showing. Denise wasn't just walking buyers through my home, she was presenting it as if it already belonged to her. But here's the part that really made my skin crawl. Instead of leaving once the couple drove off, she stepped back inside. Clipboard in hand, she casually dropped a new set of fines onto my kitchen table. "You're not complying," she muttered to my empty living room, smirking like she was rehearsing for an audience that wasn't there. And she didn't stop there. Denise lingered for another 30 minutes, moving through my house as if it were her own. She wiped counters, straightened the furniture, fluffed the couch cushions, even watered the plant by my kitchen window. It wasn't sneaky, it was practiced. She wasn't afraid of being caught. She looked comfortable, like she belonged. That detail of watering my plant hit me harder than anything else. It was so casual, so bizarre, that I almost laughed. Almost, because the truth was sinking in. This woman wasn't just harassing me with hoe nonsense. She was treating my house as her personal business venture, and I had been too blind to realize it. I spent the rest of that night combing through old camera footage, searching for more evidence. What I found turned my stomach. Denise had been entering my home regularly at least twice a week for over a month, sometimes alone, sometimes with strangers, always for about an hour, always precise. She had studied my schedule like a predator tracks prey. She knew when I went grocery shopping, when I was with clients, when I went for runs around the lake. She had my life mapped out, down to the minute, so she could use my home whenever she pleased. The footage proved it beyond doubt, but my brain struggled to process what I was seeing. Was she running some kind of illegal rental operation out of my house? Were those visitors potential tenants? Buyers? The idea seemed insane, but every piece of evidence pointed in that direction. I needed answers, which meant digging into Denise's past. Frank had mentioned she once worked in real estate in Arizona. That was my starting point. A quick online search brought up her old LinkedIn profile, and what I saw there tied everything together. Scrolling through her history, I found a folder tucked under her recent activity labeled Project Development. My address was listed as a target property. My blood went cold. Her profile revealed the truth. 10 years as a senior real estate agent in Phoenix, specializing in luxury vacation rentals, waterfront homes, and investment properties. Page after page of glowing testimonials praising her ability to turn homes into cash machines. Suddenly, her obsession with my house made perfect sense. This wasn't about standards or community rules. It was business. To her, my lake house wasn't my sanctuary, it was a product. And LinkedIn was only the beginning. For hours, I went deeper, scouring every rental platform I could find. Airbnb, VRBO, Booking.com, even smaller regional sites I'd never heard of. At first, nothing, no familiar photos, no listings with my address. For a moment, I thought maybe I was paranoid, maybe those people were just potential buyers or friends. But then, on the last site I checked, I found it. There it was, my living room, my furniture, my exact photo, the one I had once sent to friends back in New York. I used as the header image. Stunning lakefront getaway, $250 per night. Host, Denise M. 28 bookings. 4.9 stars. Available year-round. I sat frozen, staring at the screen, reading and rereading until the words blurred together. This woman had been renting out my home, the place I lived and worked, to strangers for nearly 3 months. She'd been cashing in on my property while simultaneously fining me for fake HOA violations. The photos in the listing were unmistakable. My kitchen, my lake view, my furniture. She had even used shots of my art studio, marketing it as a creative retreat for her guests. And then I saw the reviews. That's when the fury really hit me. The reviews were glowing, almost sickeningly so. Denise was such a wonderful host. The lakefront location is perfect, and the house has everything you could ever want for a relaxing getaway. Another praised how spotless and well-maintained everything was, applauding her attention to detail. One reviewer even highlighted the art supplies in the studio. calling it a thoughtful touch that made the space feel authentic. I could barely breathe. These people had been sleeping in my bed, cooking in my kitchen, rifling through my belongings, and all the while, they believed Denise owned the place. My stomach churned as I did the math. 28 bookings at $250 a night. That was at least $7,000 just from what I could see, and that didn't account for longer stays or peak season price hikes. In just 3 months, she'd earned more off my house than I had tattooing in the same period. She wasn't just harassing me with bogus fines, she was running a full-scale criminal operation behind the mask of an HOA enforcer. Clipboard in one hand, hospitality empire in the other. I used to share outrageous stories like this on a Drama Nest, but I never imagined I'd end up starring in one myself. If you were me, would you have called the cops right then, or would you have plotted revenge? Because sitting there, reading strangers gush about their host Denise while I was being fined for imaginary violations, I was leaning hard toward revenge. The rational side of me knew I needed to document everything and call the authorities, but the furious part of me wanted to set a trap, catch her red-handed and make sure she paid for every single violation. Then came the detail that pushed me past the point of no return. One reviewer wrote about how Denise had given them a packet of local recommendations, restaurant menus, activity guides, even coupons for nearby shops. She wasn't just renting my home illegally, she was running a hospitality business, complete with concierge services. My house had become her bed and breakfast, and she was pulling it off with rave reviews. I took screenshots of everything, every review, every listing photo, every single word. I backed it all up to multiple devices and to the cloud. I knew this evidence would be crucial. But even as I documented it, a plan was forming. If Denise wanted to play the role of host, I would become her ultimate guest. I would book my own home, walk through that door as a paying customer, and confront her with undeniable proof. I set up a fake profile, Ben Carter, business consultant from Seattle. I found stock images for the photo, wrote up a believable backstory, and booked a weekend at my own lake house. 3 nights, paid in full, $250 per night for the privilege of sleeping in my own bed. The irony nearly broke me, but I needed irrefutable evidence, something that would hold up in court. Within 20 minutes, a message popped up. Hi Ben, I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome you to this gorgeous lake house retreat. The over-the-top exclamation points and cheerful tone made me want to smash my phone. She was practically glowing with excitement about renting my house back to me. Her reply even included a welcome packet filled with restaurant tips and hiking trail maps, as though she were running a 5-star lodge instead of committing property fraud. I finalized the booking for the upcoming weekend. Every email, every payment, every exchange was carefully saved. This wasn't about getting my money back anymore. This was about justice. And Denise had no idea who she was really dealing with. Before I could execute my plan, I needed to know exactly where I stood legally. I called a free legal advice hotline and laid out the entire situation. The attorney on the other end sounded unfazed, like this was just another day at the office for him. He explained calmly, renting out someone else's property without consent isn't just unethical, it's fraud and theft of services. Victims in cases like this can often pursue triple damages. Triple. I ran the numbers in my head as he spoke. 7,000 multiplied by 3, that was $21,000 in damages, not even counting court costs or attorney fees. Denise's little side hustle was about to turn into a very expensive mistake. Then he added something that made my blood pressure spike. If she's been entering your property without your permission, that counts as breaking and entering, and no matter how she got the keys. And the fact that she's been doing this repeatedly as part of a business, that makes it even worse. He urged me to document everything, gather solid evidence, and avoid doing anything that could look like harassment or vigilante justice. I assured him I wouldn't do anything illegal, at least not technically. My only goal was to catch her in the act so she couldn't talk her way out of it later. Meanwhile, Denise kept messaging Ben Carter as though we were best friends. She reminded me of my Friday arrival time, attached a list of house rules, and even sent over a guide to local attractions. The rules made me want to laugh and scream at the same time. No smoking indoors, quiet hours after 10 p.m., Clean up after yourself. She was dictating rules for my own house, stricter rules than she'd ever imposed when dealing with me as the actual owner. Then came the message that almost made me throw my phone. Just between us, she wrote, the owner can be a real pain. He's always making noise with his art projects and honestly doesn't know how to keep the place up for guests. But don't worry, I make sure everything's perfect before anyone arrives. I read it 3 times, hardly able to believe it. She was trash-talking me broken bar while charging me to stay in my own home. I decided to push back gently, to see how far her deception went. I messaged her, hey Denise, quick question, does the actual owner know about the rental? I'd hate to cause any issues with neighbors. Her response came fast, haha, don't worry, hun, he's never around and totally clueless. What he doesn't know won't hurt him. My hands shook as I took screenshots and backed them up in multiple places. That single message was a written confession, proof she was operating without my consent. Any attorney could win this case with that alone. I spent the rest of the week gearing up for what I was now calling Operation Surprise Guest. I charged every device I had, prepped backup storage for evidence, and even lined up a lawyer in case things escalated quickly. The plan was simple: show up as Ben, let Denise go through her entire routine, and then reveal my real identity once everything was caught on camera. She thought she was clever, but she had no idea she was stepping into a trap. The night before my stay, she sent one last cheerful message. Can't wait for your arrival tomorrow at 6 p.m. You are going to absolutely love this getaway. Sweet dreams. But tucked inside that same message was something that froze me. She casually mentioned that the current owner was planning to move soon and that she'd be happy to discuss purchase options if I was interested in making the property my permanent home. She wasn't just renting my house, she was actively trying to sell it. By Friday evening, my nerves were electric. At 5:30 p.m., I parked a block away from my own house and raised my binoculars. Sure enough, Denise showed up like a professional host. She carried a whole kit of fresh towels, a basket of snacks, brochures for local businesses, even flowers for the kitchen table. I watched as she pulled out an unauthorized key, unlocked my door, and strolled inside like she owned the place. For the next 20 minutes, I sat frozen, watching her move through my home as if it were hers to prepare. Denise drifted through my home like a 5-star hotel manager preparing for VIP guests. She fluffed the couch cushions, straightened the magazines on the coffee table, and even lit a scented candle in the living room. She wasn't just staging a rental, she was treating my house like her personal business property. Right at 6 p.m., I rolled my suitcase up the walkway and approached my own front door as though I were checking in for a weekend getaway. My pulse hammered in my ears, but I forced myself to keep a friendly, relaxed smile. When I knocked, Denise opened the door with a beaming grin. "Ben, welcome, welcome." "Perfect timing," she said, almost bouncing with excitement. She ushered me inside as though she were handing me some incredible gift. I'll admit, the sheer dedication of her performance was nearly impressive. If it hadn't been happening in my own living room, surrounded by my own furniture, I might have admired the act. She immediately launched into her polished hosting routine. She walked me through the house, proudly pointing out features like she had designed the place herself. "This is the master bedroom with a stunning lake view. The kitchen is fully stocked with everything you'll need, and the art studio lots of supplies if you're feeling creative." I followed along, nodding politely while she described my possessions like museum exhibits. The entire experience was so surreal I almost felt detached from reality. Was I really standing in my own house, pretending to be a guest, while the intruder played tour guide? Things got even stranger on the deck overlooking the water. Denise slipped seamlessly into real estate mode. "The location is perfect for peace and inspiration," she explained, sweeping her arm toward the lake. "Homes here are skyrocketing in value. You're getting a steal at just $250 a night. Most places like this would be at least $400. I bit back a laugh. She was pitching my own house to me, trying to convince me what a deal I was getting for the privilege of sleeping in my own bed. That's when I knew it was time to start collecting evidence. I pulled out my phone, pretending to snap pictures of the lake, while quietly recording. "So, can you tell me a little about the owner?" I asked casually. Instead of brushing it off like before, Her face shifted to more calculating, more serious. "The current owner is in some financial trouble," she said with feigned sympathy. "He'll probably have to sell soon. Honestly, I think you'd be the perfect buyer for this place." She wasn't just running an illegal rental anymore. She was trying to push me out of my own home. I kept my phone rolling as she layered on her sales pitch disguised as friendly conversation. "The owner doesn't understand this property's potential," she continued, fussing with a throw pillow on my couch. "It's been sitting here underused, when it could be making real income. Lucky for you, his loss could be your gain. I could even connect you with the right people to make an offer maybe below market if we move quickly." Outwardly, I nodded and made the right noises, but inside I was screaming. This woman was standing in my living room explaining how I'd failed as a homeowner and how she could help someone else steal the house out from under me. The manipulation was staggering. Then came the twist I hadn't expected. When I asked about booking future stays, instead of her usual chirpy answers, she handed me a business card with a serious look. "I manage several properties in the area. I can always find you something ideal," she said. "But honestly, this place won't be available much longer. The owner's under pressure from developers, and soon he'll have to make some tough decisions. If you're serious about this location, you'll need to act fast. I can make sure you get the best deal." She wasn't just stealing income. She was orchestrating my financial ruin. And that's when Frank appeared. I had been so focused on Denise's performance that I hadn't noticed him coming up the path. Suddenly, he was there on the deck holding a thick manila folder, his face unusually stern, even a little angry. "Leo, son," he called firmly, using my real name. "You need to see this right now." Denise's smile collapsed. Her face drained of color as she realized Frank had just exposed me. The panic in her eyes might have been funny if I hadn't been boiling with rage. Frank wasn't just a friendly neighbor anymore. He had been investigating on his own. And when he opened that folder, pulling out photographs, documents, and what looked like damning proof, I knew the game was about to change. Frank spread papers across the patio table like a detective unveiling a case file. "I've been documenting everything for months, son," he said, sliding forward what looked like surveillance notes. "She hasn't just been using your place, the Johnsons' cabin, the Martinez cottage, even old Mrs. Peterson's house whenever she goes to visit her daughter." But what he revealed next nearly made my blood run cold. And unlisted real estate postings for my property, with Denise already named as the selling agent. She wasn't only trying to drive me out with harassment and unauthorized rentals, she was setting herself up to profit from the sale of my home whether I agreed to sell or not. As Denise's excuses crumbled into panic, I wondered, was this the downfall of her scheme, or was there an even deeper conspiracy at play? The police arrived within 10 minutes. Watching them handcuff Denise in my own driveway was one of the most satisfying moments of my life. The officers worked quickly but carefully, and once they reviewed Frank's evidence folder alongside my recordings of her admissions, they didn't hesitate. "Ma'am, you're under arrest for unlawful use of property, fraud, conspiracy to commit real estate fraud, and breaking and entering," the lead officer announced. Denise looked at me with disbelief plastered across her face, as if she couldn't comprehend how her perfect plan had unraveled so completely. But that arrest was only the beginning. Within 2 days, the police uncovered a scheme far bigger than anyone expected. Frank's meticulous record showed that Denise had been running a widespread illegal rental and real estate manipulation operation across the neighborhood, exploiting at least 4 different homes without their owners' knowledge. Mrs. Martinez called me in tears when she finally learned why her electric bill had been sky-high and why strangers kept leaving online reviews about her cottage. It suddenly made sense why developers had been pestering her with lowball offers. Denise had been secretly using her home while at the same time pushing her to sell below value. The legal consequences escalated quickly. My lawyer, who happened to specialize in fraud, looked over the evidence and practically lit up. "This is a prosecutor's dream," he told me. "She documented everything herself, admitted to it on video, and treated it like a full business operation. She's facing both serious criminal charges and civil liability to multiple victims." Within a week, we calculated that Denise had pocketed nearly $12,000 in just 6 months, spread across 4 properties, all while trying to drive down local property values so her developer contacts could swoop in with bargain offers. The criminal side of things was even heavier. The district attorney explained that Denise was staring at up to 5 years in prison for systematic fraud, conspiracy, breaking and entering, and running an unlicensed business. What made it worse was that she had deliberately targeted multiple homeowners within the same community while colluding with developers to manipulate the housing market. The woman who had spent months lecturing me about community standards was now being charged with felony crimes against that very community. The irony was almost too perfect, and I made sure to underline that irony to every reporter who called for an interview. The fallout spread quickly. The HOA scheduled an emergency meeting to remove Denise from her leadership position. This time, they also had to face the truth that she had been abusing her HOA authority to collect information for her scams. Frank was unanimously elected as the new president. His very first act, he threw out every bogus violation Denise had ever issued and set up new transparency rules for all HOA operations. Every absurd fine over lawn height, parking angles, even doormat size was declared void and refunded with interest. I personally got back $2,100 in fake penalties, along with a formal apology from the board for letting the harassment and property manipulation go unchecked for so long. The neighborhood itself began to heal. Neighbors who had kept their distance for months suddenly stopped by with apologies and casseroles along with their own stories of Denise's suspicious behavior. Mrs. Rodriguez brought over homemade tamales and admitted that she'd been getting unsettling calls about selling her house ever since Denise arrived. I knew something wasn't right when she kept asking about my finances and if I'd consider selling, she said, but I stayed quiet. I didn't want to become her next target. The Johnsons shared that Denise had also been pressuring them a broken bar. Denise had even tried convincing the Johnsons to put their beloved anniversary home on the market, warning them that the housing bubble was about to burst and they should sell before losing everything. Meanwhile, my tattoo shop was busier than ever once the story made the local news. People started driving in from 3 counties just to get ink from the guy who exposed the HOA tyrant and uncovered a real estate fraud ring. Overnight, I went from barely keeping up with appointments to being booked out for months. I even had to hire an assistant just to manage the workload. The irony wasn't lost on me. Denise's attempt to ruin my livelihood had ended up making it more successful than I ever dreamed. Sometimes life has a twisted sense of humor, and in this case, it came wrapped in justice and community unity. 6 months later, I sat on my deck sipping coffee when a foreclosure notice appeared across the lake at Denise's house. Sheriff's deputies were nailing signs to the post as Frank strolled by. He saw me watching and settled into the chair I always kept ready for him. "Heard she's stocking shelves at the grocery store these days," he said with a grin. "Working double shifts when she gets weekend release, trying to pay restitution and legal fees out of prison wages." I took a slow sip, the sun glittering across the water, and Frank chuckled as he lit his pipe. "Karma has a way of charging compound interest, doesn't it? Especially when federal wire fraud is involved." It struck me how surreal it was as someone who once strutted around like she owned the neighborhood now had nothing left. She thought she was untouchable, Frank added, shaking his head. Now all the power she clung to is gone. I laughed and nodded. Sure is. Sometimes karma just needs a little help from ordinary folks who refuse to back down. We sat in comfortable silence, watching the calm lake, finally at peace. Denise, meanwhile, was serving a 3-year sentence in federal prison and facing years of financial restitution. Her developer allies were being investigated across multiple states. Word was she'd been assigned to prison laundry duty, trying to shave time off her sentence through good behavior. The irony was thick as she was now the one stuck doing grueling labor while I lived the life she had tried to strip away. People occasionally ask if I regret pushing things as hard as I did, if I feel guilty that Denise lost everything over what started as HOA violations. My answer is always the same: absolutely not. She had countless chances to stop, to apologize, to do the right thing. Instead, she escalated, turning petty harassment into fraud and then into a full-blown criminal empire that endangered the stability of an entire community. She didn't just target me, she victimized my neighbors, too, exploiting their homes and manipulating property values for her own profit. Some people deserve forgiveness. Some people deserve exactly what they get. If there's a lesson here, it's this: never underestimate the strength that comes from standing up for yourself. The system can work, but only if you're brave enough to use it and relentless enough to follow it through. People like Denise count on silence. They count on us being too afraid or too tired to push back. But when you shine a light on their corruption, the game changes. It's easy to feel powerless against someone who seems to have authority, but the truth is we all have the ability to fight back, no matter how stacked the odds look. This was never just about one neighbor dispute. It was about proving that your rights matter, your home matters, and no one has the right to make you feel small in your own space. Standing up for yourself isn't just about winning, it's about ensuring that people like Denise know there are consequences. If that makes them think twice before targeting someone else, then it's worth it. Because truth, in the end, always wins. So, remember this: your home is your castle, your rights matter, and justice has a way of finding those who think they're above it all. Sometimes it just needs a little push. Still thinking about this wild ride? So are we. Stick around and unravel more madness with Anna Dramanest.